Moving on to the bottom of page 1 for 10.3, let's kind of recap what we were talking about earlier, kind of how we got here. Solving quadratics so far, before we introduced the quadratic formula, we basically had two methods. In 7.6, we talked about factoring and then using the zero product property. So we said that if we could get it into factored form, something times something else, I could take that first something, x plus whatever it is, and set that equal to 0 and find one of the solutions. And I could take the second factor, x plus whatever that was, set that equal to 0, because when you have something times something else equal to 0, one of those has to be 0. And then we would solve those simpler equations to come up with our values for x. Well, what we discovered fairly quickly is that there are a lot of quadratics that don't factor nice. There's a lot of answers for x that aren't rational numbers. There might be radicals involved or fractions or things that it might be difficult to obtain just with the factoring, or impossible to obtain with factoring. So then in chapter 10, and actually this was 10.1, sorry about that typo there, should be 10.1, not 10.2. In 10.1, we looked at the square root property and said, well, if you can get the x squared piece, whether it be an actual x squared or a factored version, a perfect square trinomial, the factor squared, if either one of those, the squared piece alone, then you could solve by taking the plus or minus square root of both sides. And again, the plus or minus came into effect to allow us to find both of those answers for x. And that's how we would solve some of them. And actually that worked really great as long as you had a perfect square trinomial or a quadratic that didn't have a linear piece, an x in it. So then the process came along in 10.2, and this was our bonus section where we said, well, is it possible to create a perfect square trinomial every time? And it is, and it's called completing the square. And so if you can do that to any quadratic, complete the square, then why not do that to the generic version? So in 10.2 then we completed the square, and that was the bonus section that you can do as a bonus problem set if you wish, and get bonus points for your problem sets for the term. The 10.2 bonus then utilized completing the square to make every quadratic a perfect square trinomial. And I'm just going to abbreviate that to PST, perfect square trinomial, because then we could use the square root property to solve it. The square root property is really quite simple and elegant. It works really nicely. There's no real search for factors or anything like that. You just move some things around, plus or minus. The completing the square takes a little bit of extra time, but again, you're not searching for the answers. It's just plugging a few things in and it works. So when we then apply completing the square to the generic standard form, where there's no numbers, it's just a, x, b, and c involved, what we get is the quadratic formula. So this is the big payoff, the big ta-da, the quadratic formula, and it always works no matter what setup you've got, factorable, non-factorable, ready to go square root property, perfect square trinomial. Don't have to complete the square, just take the pieces, plug it into the quadratic formula. You will get an answer every single time. And that the only requirement is that you set it equal to 0. So or you move things around so that your quadratic equation equals 0. So it always works as long as the equation is in standard form, equal to 0. That is going to be critical. One of the main mistakes I see on the test coming up is you get so excited and it's like, oh, quadratic formula always works, and you forget to check to see if it's rearranged in this right order. C might be on the other side, and you just pull that number and use it. You'll have the wrong sign, and it will just cause things to fall apart very quickly. So watch for that. And here it is in the book. page 615, you'll want to memorize this formula. We've talked about how you can best do that for yourself. I think I need to adjust the camera here a little bit. So there it is on page 615. It's negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, the whole thing over 2a. And they wrote it out in words too for you.